Good afternoon. We're here today with the Age of England podcasters. We're here with Emily and Cole, and we're here to give some of your questions that you've put in to the Age of England podcasters. So thank you very much for coming, Emily.
Thank you.
Cole. Thanks, Henry. So first of all, I've got some questions that we've asked everybody on social media, and come back with lots of questions, and I'm just going to ask them and see where it goes. Okay. So our first question is, could you tell us a little bit about how libraries have played a role in the Age of England podcast?
Well, where to start? Well, for me, as somebody who is not a historian but loves reading about history, this is the perfect place to come. And it was one of the first things I did when I moved to Eastbourne, was to come here and sit in your local history section and read up about that. And that was a few years before we'd even started setting up a podcast. Yeah. But just turning the pages of those books and starting to get a sense of the place and a feel for the place and a feel for some of the characters was a really good way in, and that made me want to know more and explore more. And I think we got chatting about some of those characters.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a proper foundation story when it comes to libraries, like a kind of Marvel foundation story. Basically, I grew up in the East End of London, and we didn't have much money. We didn't have any books in the house, and the library, Wood Street Library in Moreton, was, just like the wardrobe in the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. It was a portal to another place. It was a place to escape home and school and go and hide and just, rummage in the shelves and find somewhere to be, a place in time or a place in the world to be, and captured my little kind of 8-9-year-old imagination. There was a girl called Lisa Crisp who used to hang out there, that helped. Incidentally, Lisa Crisp won the school lottery a couple of years later, and I was very jealous. I've never forgiven that. But the libraries opened up that possibility that there was more to life, more to adventure, more to thinking and feeling than the community around me was really allowing me to do. And in tandem with a brilliant English teacher, they opened up my life to all those possibilities. My mum was a cleaner who became a library cleaner and then became a library assistant and then became a librarian. So she was on a kind of similar journey. And without that, without the libraries of Walthamstow, I wouldn't be doing this, I wouldn't be talking to you, I wouldn't probably have moved to Eastbourne, I wouldn't be able to relate to my landscape or my life or my culture in the way that I do. Everything comes from that initial exposure. You do great things here. I get a bit emotional about it.
So the podcast is absolutely wonderful, and you're telling all these stories, and a lot of them are local history stories you're telling. And obviously, the way you edit it together, it's really, really word perfect. How much research do you have to do before it starts? How much is written down that you're reading from? How much are we allowed to see the inner workings of?
This is a great bone of contention. This is
a very
because I was listening to it. You were talking about the what's it called, the Parsons. And I was just thinking, are they surrounded by books? But you're outside. It's raining. You've told me it's raining.
Yeah. No. Sometimes I do come with a piece of paper or a notebook. Normally those are the days when it's absolutely tipping it down with rain, so all my notes get washed away anyway. It is a real bone of contention because Cole is all about being spontaneous and just feeling the story. Obviously we know a little bit about stories. I've been sitting here doing research, but we do approach it from a very, very, very different points, but I think that's why we work pretty well together. So I've got a few background facts. Cole is all about feeling it in the environment that we're recording in.
And knowing the research, doing deep research beforehand and coming with the story.
Yeah, and we've done the reading, but quite often we are relying on the guests to tell us the story, and we are the people asking the questions, but perhaps we're not asking the questions in the way that it's a straightforward interview, it's a walk and a chat. So we're finding out more about how the guest feels about a particular character or a particular person as well.
I'm forever saying, Emily, put those notes away.
Right.
When we started doing it, it was absolutely horrifying because I wanted to plan absolutely everything. I'm a planner. I'm the one who edits it together as well.
Yeah,
so,
genius. Genius.
So you're thinking it's better to have less that I can turn into something, or just leave the text rolling, and what you're actually going to tell us is each one takes 14 hours and you edit it down to a nice half hour?
We've got it down to having done quite a few of them now. They started off perhaps a little bit more rambly, but then that's the nature of what we do. We're not really restricted by a half an hour programme block, or this has to fit into a 10-minute slot. So we do literally turn on the microphone, talk about where we are, and then just go for it. And that doesn't mean to say that there's not a lot that ends up not being used.
I think there's one really important characteristic of this, which people have been kind enough to pick up on, is that this isn't, we don't have anything to persuade you of. When it's not a documentary as such. What we're trying to do is get you to come on a walk with your ears, essentially. So we want you to feel like you're there. We want you to feel like you're part of it. And I've had a note from somebody in Kazakhstan who said, I really enjoyed going on a walk with you across Beachy Head yesterday. Okay, fine. And they were walking around their flat in Kazakhstan. And so that is what we're trying to do, is to make it immersive and make it feel like you're with us. And that means you need this isn't Radio 4, it isn't BBC Sussex, it isn't any of those things. It's something else that is more immersive and improvisational.
And we don't plan the walks specifically. We don't roll out the ordnance survey map as much as I would like to and say, right, we're going to go here, then we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to go here, and then we'll end up here. It is more spontaneous than that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I can remember in one of the early episodes we ended up litter picking, which wasn't part of the plan, but it just... something will catch your eye, you'll see something.
It made me so angry, really. And then if you don't pick it up, you're part of the problem. Right? So.
Yeah, so...
But likewise, you haven't done one where you're stuck in an industrial estate and can't find the way out.
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
But we could. I mean, we're not... I don't think being in an urban environment would be a problem. I think that'd be really interesting. It just so happens that we wanted to start in the beautiful places on the Downs, but we're finding more and more interesting places that we wouldn't have thought of before.
Yeah. We're definitely not running out of places to explore, which is interesting. I think it also helps that we're friends most of the time.
Well,
and,
depends on your definition. No, I'm kidding. No, it does.
That is the last part of the podcast ever made.
No, it does help. That does help. Yeah. But then we also have to know when to shut up, don't we? Well, I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes me. I get a bit overexcited about describing things sometimes, when sometimes it's just about walking.
And sometimes it's about the story. I mean, you talked about Parson Darby, who is am I going to get this right, 17th century? Is that right?
I'm not going to nod in my head because I was grabbing hold of the facts.
In the 1600s, so
yes,
17th century. Priest up in East Dean, Jonathan Darby, and the sort of classic local legend about him is that he carved or enlarged a hole underneath Beachy Head in which to sit all night long. He had carpets and a sofa in there, and suspend a light in order to save shipping from being wrecked on the chalk beds out there. And this is the first Beachy Head lighthouse, and I have a sceptical view of that traditional story about Jonathan Darby, in that it seems to me that a light that repels ships can also be used to attract them, and it was a big time for smuggling, and so I've got questions about that. And just to kind of leap back in time and go to his gravestone and try and think about him as an individual and his family and his wife and the people around him, and say, all right, mate, who were you? Let's get to grips with you. Because we don't have a budget or a corporation behind us or anything else, we can afford to do that. We can afford to just dwell with the story and just let it speak to us. That's the privilege of this.
Yeah, it's not panorama. There's no end result. to try and.
And I guess without download culture, it wouldn't exist at all, would it? I mean, it sounds sort of old and traditional, going on a walk and talking about old stories, but without that, you would have to be actually, some corporation would have to pick you up and broadcast you.
Yeah. And it's very low-fi. We're very low tech as well. It's literally a small handheld device with.
I'm going to resist that slightly.
Right.
I mean, it is a small amount of gear, but the fact is, you are an extraordinarily accomplished producer, and what we therefore get is a soundscape that allows you to be immersive, right? It's not. Emily is not just some Joe out there pointing a little microphone. it's a gorgeous, immersive, BBC or ITV or whoever, he said quickly so that we don't affiliate, a broadcast quality package. And that, I think, there are a lot of podcasts out there, and some of them don't fit that description.
Yeah, I'll take that. It is a crafted podcast.
Yeah.
It's something that I can put together and record because that's my background and that's my skill. But what I think I'm saying is that we're not going out with a crew. We're not going out with even very expensive kit, 10 microphones. It's really small, but I think that helps create that sense of intimacy.
It does. I do think, though, also, there are two other things that pick up on what you said there, Henry. First of all, the podcast explosion means that we can just do it, and people can just access it, and they can find it, and so strangers can connect, and that's fantastic. I mean, this is like the kind of spoken word punk kind of era, really. Anyone can do it, and that's brilliant. And the other thing is, I suppose, making another music analogy, like the dance explosion in the 80s and 90s, the kit has evolved so much that the small thing that we have in our hands is broadcast quality. And as long as you've got that, you can make something beautiful. So I think it's a really special time. I mean, the downside of that is this is too much stuff to listen to. But the upside of it is if you find the right one that really speaks to you, then it's great, and it's really easy to do. So if anyone is listening to or watching this and wants to have a go. There's never been a better time.
And as much as it's about us two chuntering on as well, I hope that there is enough space for people to get that sense of where we are as well. And I'm constantly telling Cole to stop talking and just recording the atmosphere and the ambience, just so that we can leave that hanging, or just use that as a transition between two different areas, being on the coast and then moving inland, and that kind of thing. And that's, but I think that's nice for us as well, because when we stop talking, then it just gives us a bit of a chance to reflect and think about what we're doing next, and listen to the birds and listen to the waves. Yeah, it's great recording around here when it's not too windy. Wind is a bit of an issue sometimes on the coast. But,
do you have a geographical remit? I mean, are you sticking to here, or would you stretch further into the county, deeper into the county, as far as Seaford, Peacehaven?
I'm very keen to explore towards Seaford and Newhaven. We've got some.
We've got plans.
We've got plans.
When I first heard it, there was a sense of rivalry that I'm a Hastings man, and there's a sense of.
Well, take us on a walk in Hastings then.
The DIY culture.
We've gone as far east as Pevensey Bay, but I'm very happy to go further. It's still the edge of England.
Yes,
I mean, it's got to be coastal, right? You've got to be able to see the sea. Otherwise, so I'm not sure we go
inland.
Oh.
We've been a bit inland, but not only a couple of miles.
Yeah, but we wouldn't go as far as Hailsham.
That might be pushing it.
Actually, look.
Sorry,
take that as an example. I just picked that at random out of my head. Right, there would be a fantastic story to tell about the Hailsham Pavilion and the art that's happened there, the music that's happened there, the cinema that's happened there. Great community gathering around that. It would be a fantastic story to tell, for someone to tell. I think our remit is to stay closer to the edge geographically for now and go up and down the coast. Really.
Another fantastic podcast in East Grinstead, the town that didn't stare. I don't know whether you've ever come across that.
No.
But talking about the history of that town and really sort of unusual place and how lots of different spiritual connections and all of that. And that's great, but that's too far inland.
That's
And that's
theirs.
got a podcast all of
Yes,
itself.
yeah.
So we don't
Right,
need to do
yeah,
that. We want the edge.
You don't want to water your brand.
But we can stretch it along the coast there, yeah.
I mean, definitely Hastings, and definitely Peacehaven, Newhaven. I mean, you know, I'd go as far as we can on the coast. Really. It's just, you know, obviously we're just doing this in our own time.
I'd do it every day if I could. Talking of Newhaven, the Hayton tunnels in the Newhaven area that were built for the Navy to use. Absolutely fascinating, and it was only really a few years ago that people started to work out that they were even there or had been there, and that's a whole other episode.
Well, they're all along there. You know, why is there a memorial to Ho Chi Minh?
That's the thing. Ho Chi Minh worked on the ferries.
Yeah. And thank you, just spot the punchline of the show. And
We can never
why are so many Korean kids coming to Eastbourne and the Seven Sisters? That's something that we think we've got to the bottom of, and we'll be covering, I hope, soon. And there are other little mysteries like that, which are joyful. You know, they're joyful.
I think another question. Did you have any preconceived ideas about Eastbourne before you both moved here?
Oh, you arrived here a few years before I did, Carl.
Yeah. So I was here. Again, this goes back to childhood. I was actually in Seaford as a 9-year-old, shortly after the library's experience, at a sanatorium for asthmatic post office kids in Seaford for 6 months. Really quite difficult, traumatic experience, really, because you weren't allowed to see parents. But it created this attachment with the coast and with the sea. And I always wanted to live by the sea. I wrote a book about the west of Ireland, and I wanted to find somewhere as an adult that I could move out of London and be in a landscape that spoke its own history like the west of Ireland does. You can read the landscape and the history of it. And I wanted that kind of experience, but still had to be within commuting distance of London. So those are the things that brought me here. And one of my Brighton friends said, "Oh, it's like Brighton after the bombs dropped." Like, right, okay. And what I came to realise was that there's a beauty in that reputation, and that it means there's a peace and a calm and a kind of different kind of pace about Eastbourne. You know, the God's Waiting Room thing, I think, is way out of date, as we all know by now. And there's some very exciting and interesting people in this town. Did we have preconceived ideas? I didn't. I sort of came at it sideways, so I sort of had an idea of what I was going to do. I'll tell you what really helped to persuade my other half to come was that I managed to get a travel freebie from the paper I was working at. We stayed in the Grand Hotel for 3 days. That helped.
See, I didn't get that. And I still persuaded my partner to come.
We persuaded you.
Actually, yeah, Cole and his wife had quite a big part to play.
So did you have any preconceived ideas before you were persuaded by Cole and his wife?
Well, we were living in London at the time and we had family in Hastings and Brighton and various places. And we did know Cole in Eastbourne. And Eastbourne won. We kept coming down, looking at houses every weekend.
So you wanted to move down to the south?
Well, I was working in Brighton at the time, so it made sense to head south. And every time we got back on the A22 or the A23, we just said, it's too rural. It's too rural. But actually what did happen was that every time we came to Eastbourne, the sun shone. Because the sun's always shining in Eastbourne, apart from today, obviously, clearly. And so that was probably a preconceived idea, that the sun always shone. And then when we moved to Eastbourne, it did shine for another 6 weeks. So
That's a great preconceived.
Yeah.
That's a lovely one.
So that helped.
I think that has something to do with the name of the podcast too, because I think Eastbourne has a different quality, obviously, to Hastings, which is pirate town. We all know that, and fascinating. And Brighton is sort of Hackney-on-Sea, really. And there's a lot of shishi bits in between. But there's something kind of other about Eastbourne. It's kind of even more on the edge than those places are. Almost coming here almost feels like you go to the edge of everywhere and then keep going for a half an hour. I love that. I really, as somebody who spent a good part of his life in London, surrounded, I couldn't even see the horizon. I love the fact that I can look beyond and see the sea and see the edge of town.
I grew up in a fairly rural area and completely took it for granted and was desperate to go and live in a city, which I did for 20 years. And the lure of being able to walk out of your house and walk down to the sea or walk onto the downs is still, and it's completely compelling, it's completely addictive to me, and I've become totally evangelical about it. That's not to say that I don't miss urban areas or cities or that I don't love Brighton or Hastings, but I think, there's something about this location. But perhaps the preconceived idea that I'd moved here and I was still a little bit young to move here. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. That was blown up.
Well, time has sorted that one out.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Are there any local customs or celebrations or events which surprised you or you weren't aware of before, like our bonfire, the llamas, steampunk festival, the airborne festival, anything like that you thought I didn't know Eastbourne about?
Steampunks. Absolutely steampunks. I think one of the first weekends that I came to Eastbourne, we were just having an innocent stroll along the seafront, and there were all these incredibly dressed, wild and wonderful people and penny farthings everywhere. And just
Harry and his penny farthing,
just extraordinary. And
I think we were a band I was in at the time. I think we were playing at Steampunk Festival. So
I think we met you on the seafront that day.
So have you got a steampunk outfit if you're playing a band?
No. We are a sort of vintagey band called the Pilgrim Mothers, which Emily's husband Dave is the guitarist.
He's your guitarist,
as well as being the guitarist for the show. We had a vintagey thing, and we have had a lot of affiliations with steampunks over the years. For me, it goes even further back. I wrote a book about English spirituality called "Is God Still an Englishman?" and I focused on the pagan circle down here, on the Lammas Festival, and I was absolutely fascinated for the first few years I was here with the kind of this kind of improvisational kind of stick it to the man kind of anti-establishment side of all of those customs that seem to be very, very old but actually aren't that old. Lammas, for example, and bonfire societies. There's a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a kind of anarchism about them, really, where they're kind of, preserving folk traditions, but there's also something very current and very energetic and very anarchic about them. I love them so much. I really do.
The Green Man Festival in Hastings.
And that's it feels like it's been going since 1382, and actually it was, I think, restarted in 1992. So it's
exactly my point. Put it better than I could. We, for example, when we first came, I went down to Middle Farm where they were doing the big Wassail at the time. And you think, well, this is a quaint old English tradition, let's go and have a look. And there's like 500 or 600 people and a torchlit procession through the orchards, and then shotguns going off, and then incantations to the ancestors. I'm thinking, what is this? I loved it.
But that's not what you think.
No.
Or maybe it's not what other people think that Sussex is about, or East Sussex is about.
And now people in Kazakhstan think about when they're walking around their flat because of your podcast.
Quite possibly, yes. Yeah.
Big shout out for somebody else, actually, Liz, who runs a operation called Chalk Horse Music. We should talk about that. I think Chalk Horse Music has a show on Hailsham FM. I don't know why Hailsham's in my mind today, but Liz and her band create wonderful modern folk music out of Sussex legends and stories. So I totally urge anyone to get involved with that. Find them Chalk Horse Music.
And finding all these stories and connections on social media as well, on Twitter, and following all these fantastically fascinating people.
Yeah.
And then realising that they're based in Eastbourne.
It's like the Nazi thing, isn't it, with the skeleton army? You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to Liz from Chalk Horse Music about local stories and things that made into songs, and then realised that there was one that kind of we knew, that we then wrote a song for this band, Pilgrim Mothers, called Skeletons and Scallywags, about the skeleton riots of the 1800s, when the local breweries enlisted an army of people with pitchforks and stones to fight the Salvation Army who were trying to exercise their right to worship on the seafront. It's fascinating stuff. And there's a song called Skeletons and Scallywags by the Pilgrim Mothers. But that's just one of so many stories.
We won't run out of stories. and that's just the historical stuff. I mean, and then you've got all the people who are still doing really fascinating
like
stuff.
Like the we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Another question. It says, your favourite thing about East Sussex, do you have any guilty pleasures? East Sussex guilty pleasures?
Oh.
I don't. You'd be too embarrassed to admit on your podcast, but you could say to us on YouTube.
Sussex guilty pleasures.
I don't like guilt.
You're addicted to skips, maybe.
Skips?
I mean, not the big skips, I mean the crisps. Or maybe skips.
Or both. Eating a packet of skips in a skip.
Okay.
I
Watching
probably
skipping.
have had far too much ice cream since being here because of
Why did you not?
ice
I mean,
cream.
there's nothing guilty about a bit of
I don't feel
physiology.
guilty about that at all.
Okay.
I tell you what I haven't done yet.
What?
I love a game of crazy golf.
And you haven't played crazy
No,
golf?
I haven't played crazy golf down
something
there.
to admit, something you haven't done yet.
Yeah. And hasn't Hastings got a big crazy
It's
golf
got- yeah,
festival?
it's got a big crazy
That's
golf
it.
Serious
festival.
competition, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't been on the big wheel yet.
Oh, I have.
I mean, but wait, we've
That's
got
fun.
the Eastbourne Eye. You should talk
Eastbourne
about the
Eye.
Eastbourne Eye. You've been on the Eastbourne
I've
Eye,
been
even though you suffer from heights.
Yeah.
Fear of heights.
Oh,
It
yes,
was
we had that on the
It was
podcast.
okay.
Listening, haven't you? Yeah.
I
didn't
quite fancy it, but I can't help feeling, that series Mark Steele's in town on Radio 4, where he goes to all these places, and he went somewhere, I think it might have been Brighton, I don't know, and he was talking about this, a kind of eye kind of thing, and he said, you have the pleasure of paying £5 to go up in a mechanical device that will give you a view unparalleled, except from the view from the hill next door. And I get that.
No, it's part of the experience. I enjoyed my trip on Eastbourne Eye.
I tell you, here's a controversial one. I quite like Airborne.
Okay. Doesn't everyone
Now,
like Airborne?
In certain
Does
circles.
Airborne have detractors?
Well, it does. It does. In certain circles, that's an unpopular view, and I get, I'll be careful what I say here. I get the opposing view, but actually, I quite like what it does for the town.
Yeah. I think
that's as much as I should say on this podcast.
I suppose is the environmental angle you're thinking of? Is that-
Yeah, environmental
Well,
angle
you
and the
are
whole
a bit-
industrial military complex.
You are a big fan of the vintage aeroplane.
Well, I am.
But
Yeah.
not the industrial military complex.
No. Well, we should talk about the Spitfire, shouldn't we?
Got that.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, if this landscape, Cuckmere, up over Beachy Head, and all of that, is very connected with Battle of Britain, and a lot of battles were fought here, and there was a lot of skirmishes, and so my dad is an aviation historian. This is he ran an aviation museum, and so that was on my mind when we came down here, because every time he came down here, he just drummed it into me. And then when we started to make the podcast, every time we went to record, a Spitfire would turn up.
I'd have a little word.
Incredible. A Spitfire would turn up, fly over us, loop the loop, and fly away again. Was that every time? Literally every time.
Like that. Actually, which from an editing perspective is actually quite tricky.
Yes.
Because Spitfire's, the tone changes.
Yeah.
So you've got to be doing a really, really good bit of conversation there that doesn't need any editing. Otherwise.
And I thought this was magical and mystical and evocative, and somehow the landscape speaking to us. And it turns out to be a bloke who's based at Biggin Hill who will bring you down here for £3,500 a pop.
But we haven't yet managed to secure a flight in the Spitfire.
I've asked.
For the purposes of the
I can't
podcast.
get in a Spitfire. You could. I couldn't even stand on a wing in a Spitfire.
That's what we haven't done yet, is we've always been on the land.
Not
When
one
we
that
were
had brought us
talking
from a
about
Spitfire.
the edge of England, or not in the air. We haven't been in the air, but we also haven't been on the sea. Apart from that time we nearly got cut off with Giles Paley Phillips when we were rock hopping in Hope Gap.
I would love, I mean, it's not a guilty pleasure, but I would love to have been able to do it. I think it's too late now. I'd love to have done one from the Sovereign Light platform. I think that would have been fascinating. But I think it's, isn't it, coming down this summer?
It's still there at the moment.
Well, Sovereign Light platform people, if you're listening. Yeah.
So this little film we're making is for a wellbeing weekend we're doing. So can I just ask you about walking for your wellbeing? I know that you Carl especially, said that you suffer from depression, and that actually walking is something that really, really helped. Are you able to talk a little bit about that?
Totally. So one of the reasons, going way back, one of the reasons why we moved to the coast was actually we had 3 babies at once. We had triplets, and we both thought, I'm not sure I can handle this unless there's also another dimension that will give me some kind of well-being. And so living by the coast seemed quite important at that point. So there's that. But more specifically, about 5 years ago, I had a fall, really very, very bad fall, and nearly died. And part of my recovery from the fall, once the physical stuff had worn away, was just this feeling of being totally overcome with anxiety. We've recorded an episode out on the hills for you guys, which we'll be sharing, and which I'd love you to listen to, and I'll go into it in a lot of depth there. But essentially, I presented myself in some amount of trouble to a wonderful charity, Health in Mind, local people, and got great help from them, from a counsellor. And one of the things that she said was, there's something about the physical aspect of walking, getting out, being in nature, being in the landscape, that will help to reset you. And it did, and it absolutely did. And I mean, I was in such a state that I had to, I couldn't walk more than 100 yards first, and then I had to walk a bit more and a bit more. And in terms of the mental health stuff, I mean, writers know that if you've got a mental block, then the best thing to do is to walk around, walk, and there's something that happens about your endorphins, or I don't understand the science of it. There's something that shifts your mentality and your feeling, and your so there's that, and then there's also the feeling of being out in nature, understanding that you're part of a bigger whole, perhaps for those of us who have a spirituality in this direction, feeling like you're connected to the divine. But even if you don't have that, just kind of resetting your perspectives. And I talked about the horizons of growing up in the city. There's something enormously restful about just being able to see the horizon. And then that helped me to recover over the course of about a year. And then lockdown came, and I think I would have, I struggled, lots of people struggled. I think I would have struggled even more without the gift of being able to get out into the landscape that we've got, hear the birds, and just reset on a daily basis. So, it sounds like a cliche, but for me, that aspect of it, getting out, mental health, well-being, being out in the landscape, and being able to talk about it, has been a lifesaver, and that's not an exaggeration.
It hasn't been such a dramatic thing for me, but I can totally vouch for what it's done for my soul, I guess, in terms of just being able to get out regularly in nature. And there's been all kinds of research done just really recently, hasn't there, about the power of nature and well-being, and whether those things that we perhaps have realised for the first time during lockdown is so important, whether that will continue to sustain us when life perhaps gets more normal again. But that sense of, just being able to have some time and some space and some peace. And just, again, we talk a bit about this in the podcast episode, but just being able to notice things in a different way. And I don't necessarily mean all kind of, not even in a mindful way, but just looking further than your hand, looking further than a building, just having that bigger sense of perspective. And being lucky enough to be able to just travel in that landscape as well, and feel it and sense it and smell it. And the sea always sounds different, the air always smells a bit different, and you get that real heightened sense of that here that perhaps you don't get in other places. But I think almost it kind of just happens and you can just enjoy it. But I think there's something about being able to train your mind to just slow down a little bit, and that makes you enjoy it more, I think. And that's why I think we love those moments on the podcast, really, those moments where we can just stop and be a little bit surprised by how the landscape, how nature is making us feel. I mean, we're terrible. We don't know the names of flowers or birds or plants, but
we find people who do.
We find people who do. But that doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. It's like that. Oh look, that's a really dark green leaf. But why is that one pale green? And why is that flower purple? And what's this bird?
Yeah, I mean that's why it's really. I'm moved when people say, listening to you allows us to feel like we can be there even though we can't, particularly in lockdown. Friends who are in London in difficult situations, I think of one in particular, in other cities too, but this friend of mine was stuck in her flat in North London with a couple of kids and a husband and nowhere to go really. Hearing her say, just being able to listen to this enables me to occupy that mental space where I feel like I'm there. I think that's such a privilege that we can do that. I feel honoured to be able to do that.
I've got something on Twitter here. So somebody says, I really enjoy listening to your podcast. It inspires me to put on my walking boots and get out exploring. Favourite episode so far was about the Beltute Lighthouse. The owner has done so much to save that wonderful landmark. How do you go about selecting your subject, be it a landmark, place, or person? So you've said they're queued up, so you've got ideas stretching for years.
We've certainly always got ideas on the go.
I don't know the answer to that.
No, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it flows quite organically out of conversations, often after a glass of wine or two. And you're like, have you heard about this? Or did you, I know that person, or should we see if we can try and find out more? But I think a lot of the ideas come from the fact that we've been individually out tramping around on the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, we're professionally engaged with this landscape in other ways too.
But just seeing stuff, hearing stuff all the time. I
think one of the rules is, it's one of mine, I don't know if it's one of ours, and it's an unspoken one, is that it shouldn't be touristy. We're not making a tourist program. We're trying to find. I was going to say the truth. That sounds a bit highfalutin. We're trying to find stories that are not necessarily obvious in that landscape. Either help people to understand the landscape that is there. For example, Beltute. What is that about? Why is that tower there? So I suppose you could classify that as touristy, but it's not. Here's a promotional half an hour for the Beltute Lighthouse. Wonderful that place is. It's a bit more of a challenge than that.
And although the characters and the lands, the places that we visit are very specific to this part of edge of England, I think the stories that we find go deeper than that, don't they? So they have the power to connect, and that's why it's so great to hear that there's someone listening in Kazakhstan or wherever they happen to be on the tube on the way into work.
Shout to the Kazakhstan massive.
Where else in the world have you heard of people listening to?
Canada, New Zealand, Japan, America,
We were, it's quite interesting charting our progress sometimes when the episodes go out, and you can find out where people are listening in a very sort of broad brush. But we were doing quite well in the Netherlands the other day for some
trending in the Netherlands
reason.
We were top of the charts in New Zealand for about an hour.
Yeah. There must have been an hour where maybe 5 people downloaded us. But
I mean, it's really interesting this though, because we just did it. We just decided to do it, and we have not really approached it in a kind of conscious programmatic way that question suggests.
No.
We just got on with it and did it, and maybe that's part of the appeal of it. Really, we just go where we find stories that we think people might be interested in. Like, for example, the big revelation to me has been Winifred Barnes. It would be wrong not to talk about Winifred Barnes. Emily can tell you who she is, but essentially we discovered that a superstar of the First World War West End stage had suddenly retired in her late 20s, I think, to live on the edge of the cliff at Holywell with a whole bunch of animals, where her and her sister were allegedly described as being too racy for meads. So we had to investigate.
We did, and she became a bit of an obsession of mine. And there have been articles written about her, some very helpful local historians have written bits and bobs, but there was something about her, there was something really intriguing about why she basically gave up her career when she got married. She married a tobacco heir, and I think they both came down here to live for a while, but it's unclear about how much he was here. Her sister seemed to be living here. Actually, her sister lived into, I think she was still around in the early 70s, but Winifred died in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 1920s, she was
A superstar.
A big superstar on the West End. But we found photos of her from the National Portrait Gallery archives of her climbing the cliffs. I mean, don't climb the cliffs, that's a terrible thing to do.
It is.
But there she was. There she was, just living this extraordinary life in this house on the edge of the cliff. And even in those days, I'm fascinated by these, because there would have been all these big grand houses that we see now still there. But she was still a bit apart from them, a bit separate. And I think we've only really scratched the surface.
And the thing is that story has never been told by anyone. As to, no one has come across that story. Except that we managed to find somebody who had restored wax recordings of West End cast productions. So we managed to find an audio recording of her singing and speaking.
Which Cole surprised me with.
Beautiful. So
A genuine surprise.
It's not commercial. We're not going to make any money out of it. We're just sharing this story because we think it's charming and we think you might be interested.
I think it's inspiring for those that live in East Sussex that people all around the world want to listen to it, because it's sometimes nice to be reminded of what a wonderful place we live in, and actually we can just close the door and walk out, and there's an exciting and fun and wonderful place, all inspiring places to get lost in Sussex.
And I hope it inspires other people, wherever you live, to explore what's on your doorstep as well, and just lift up that stone and do a little bit of digging.
And visit a local library and look at the local history.
Absolutely. Yes.
Our last question is about a time machine. If you have a time machine to take you to any period in history, and we're going to stay here, you've got to stay here, you can't go on to Rome. Okay.
So
we're going to make
Sussex,
it the edge of England.
Right.
You've got to stay geographically the edge of England. Where are you going to go in history?
Oh!
Go on.
Well, you're talking about Winifred Barnes.
You're going to knock on that door.
I think I would go back to maybe...
And get an autograph.
1980, more than an autograph. I want an invite to a party.
Yeah.
I think she threw some fabulous parties, and I want to be on her guest list.
You want to find out why it's too racy for means.
Totally.
Absolutely.
And I would be there with
Yeah.
my little handheld recorder.
And a feather boa, I hope.
The boa, the heels, the sparkles, the works. Yeah, I would love that. And there would be dogs barking and parrots flying around and all kinds of things. I would love that. But actually, can I have two answers?
Oh, you can have
I think, you see, it's such a good question, and there are so many. The wonderful thing about this landscape is that there are imprints on it that go back literally thousands and thousands of years. So the whole Second World War period is really interesting, and there's loads of things we could discover there. But you could go back to the Bronze Age, you could go back to the Neolithic period. There's burial grounds up there, there's long barrows, people from farming communities who carried out rituals and all kinds of things. So perhaps being...
You just want a time machine, don't you?
I just want a time machine, quite honestly, but I would love to be an observer in a period of history that I know so little about. But to be there as a storyteller and watch something unfold in the Bronze Age up in the Downs would be amazing.
I think I want to pick up on that and go even more specific. There is somebody that I would like to interview, and I'd like to know who they are, how they got here, what they want, what they wanted, and what they loved about the place. And it's Beachy Head Woman. It's the remains of the woman who was discovered. I can't remember. Do you remember the exact dates when she was? But it's Bronze Age,
No,
right?
because we need an expert for that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We're experts on whatever we're doing for that hour. And it just, but she was certainly here in Roman times, because I think she was the partner of a Roman. And the thing about her is that she came from sub-Saharan Africa, and she came here as a person of status, judging by what she was wearing. And I love the fact, for various different reasons, that the person whose remains we have, who is the oldest known oldest known inhabitant of Eastbourne, was a woman from sub-Saharan Africa. I'd love to just dwell on that for a moment for all sorts of reasons, because it represents what actually an international place this is, more than people realise. I'm being careful about how I phrase that, but I would love to talk to her anyway. I'd love to know her name. We have some sense of what her face is, because the Beachy Head story, which is opening up on Beachy Head at the moment, is going to have that display that shows the reconstruction of her face, so it's possible to look her in the eye. But I'd love to know her name, and I'd love to know her story.
That's wonderful. I would like to thank Emily and Cole from the Edge of England podcast for joining us today for a kind of behind-the-scenes look at their inspirations. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks very much
It's
for having us.
a joy. Can we just say www.edgeofengland.com and at Edge of England on Twitter and Edge of England on Facebook, and come to your local library.
All of those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you.